I was back at Fort Carson, finishing my last day on base after a long deployment in Europe. My duffel bag was open on the cot, half-packed with uniforms, boots, and the Bronze Star I'd kept wrapped in a sock for safekeeping. I was looking forward to a week of doing absolutely nothing before heading back to the house in Aurora. My phone buzzed FaceTime from my sister Sandra. Perfect timing, I thought. It was my niece's 8th birthday, and I'd promised to call. I hit accept, and there she was, her little gap-toothed smile filling the screen. Sandra hovered in the background, fussing with balloons. Greg, her husband, was sitting at the kitchen table in his favorite polo shirt, pretending to read something on his phone. We chatted for a few minutes, sang the world's most off-key version of Happy Birthday, and my niece ran off to tear open a present. Sandra waved the phone at me and said, "Hang on, I've got to take care of something," then set it down on the counter without ending the call. The screen went black, but the audio was still live. I started folding my last set of fatigues when I heard Greg's voice, muffled but clear enough. "So, the plan's simple," he said. "We get her into rehab. She's been limping since that accident Easy Sell. Once she's in, we put the house on the market. That place will pull close to $1 million. Nah." Sandra's voice cut in, sharper. "We can't screw this up. Between your debt and the Boulder place, we need that cash fast. She won't fight it. She's too proud to admit she can't handle living alone." There was a pause, then Greg chuckled. "Exactly. She's a soldier, not a lawyer." I froze, one boot in my hand, listening like my life depended on it. Rehab? Selling the house? My house? My name was the only one on the deed. They were talking about it like it was already theirs. Sandra lowered her voice, but I could still make out every word. "We'll start lining up buyers while she's here. Make it look like we're just helping. By the time she figures it out, it'll be done." Greg laughed again. "She'll thank us eventually." I set the boot down carefully, like if I made a sound, they'd hear me through the phone. My mind was running military fast threat assessment, options, timing. I didn't slam the call shut, didn't jump in and start screaming. That's not how you win a fight. Sandra's footsteps moved across the kitchen tile. A cupboard opened. She must have picked up the phone because the audio cut out, and her face popped back on screen. "Sorry, got sidetracked," she said with a smile that now looked like a mask. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Sounds like you've got a lot going on." She didn't catch it. She never did. After we hung up, I sat on the cot, staring at the beige wall. My stomach had that tight, compressed feeling I used to get right before a briefing in Kabul, right before I learned how bad things really were. Sandra and Greg thought I was a mark. They thought military discipline meant I'd follow orders, even from them. They'd just made a critical mistake. They'd said it out loud, and I'd heard every word. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my notes app, starting a fresh page. At the top, I typed in all caps, Operation Homefront. Under that, 2 columns, their moves and my moves. First entry under theirs, push for rehab fake concern. Under mine, gather proof before confrontation. It wasn't about yelling or demanding an explanation. I'd seen too many soldiers waste energy on rage. You don't fire until your sights are lined up and the wind's in your favor. I checked the time. They'd be home in Aurora, feeling smug, thinking they had months to set their little plan in motion. What they didn't know was that I was headed there in 48 hours. My orders had changed: no more deployment, no more waiting around. I zipped the duffel and set it by the door. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Sandra. "Can't wait to see you. We'll make sure the house feels like home for you." I stared at it for a long second before sliding the phone into my pocket. I'd let her keep thinking that. Let them both believe they were holding the cards. But I'd already decided. The game had started, and I was playing to win. The early morning sun was barely up when I stepped off the base shuttle into the parking lot, the cool Colorado air biting at my face. I tossed my bag into the backseat of my truck and slid behind the wheel, my hands tight around the steering wheel as I pulled out toward Aurora. The closer I got, the more the familiar streets started to pull up pieces of my life I hadn't thought about in years. The house had been my mother's pride, a plain 2-story with a wide front porch where she'd drink her coffee every morning. She'd bought it in the late 90s, worked double shifts at the hospital to make the mortgage. I was still in high school, spending weekends helping her paint, trim, or patch the roof. When I joined the Army Corps of Engineers, she handed me the keys before my first deployment to Iraq. Always have a place to come home to, she'd said, like it was an order. And when I got back from that tour, the place was worn, but still solid. I'd saved enough hazard pay to redo the kitchen, fix the deck, even replace the old furnace before the first snow. Years later, when Sandra's condo flooded, I told her she could stay in the house while I was stationed overseas. No rent, no conditions. Just take care of the place. She moved in with Greg a few months after they got married, and I didn't question it. I figured family was family, you help when you can. I passed the old gas station on Peoria Street where Mom used to buy scratch-offs, convinced one day she'd win big. A few blocks down was the park where she'd take us on Sundays, even after pulling a 12-hour shift. She'd pack bologna sandwiches and call it a picnic. As I turned onto our street, I could almost see her on the porch again, a cup in one hand, a crossword in the other. The memory hit harder than I expected. The house came into view, exactly as I'd left it before my last deployment, at least from the outside. Fresh paint on the shutters, the lawn cut short. I parked across the street and sat for a minute, watching the light in the kitchen flicker on. Inside, I knew the layout by heart. The creak in the second stair, the narrow hallway to the back porch, the tiny bathroom window that never latched right. It was more than wood and drywall. It was years of sweat and scraped knuckles, of me and Mom fixing what we couldn't afford to replace. When she got sick, I came home from Afghanistan on emergency leave. She lasted 2 more months. We sat on that porch one evening in September, the air turning cold. She handed me a manila envelope deed, insurance papers, the whole stack. Her voice was calm, almost businesslike. Don't let anyone take what's yours. I'd never forgotten those words. They weren't just about the house. They were about holding your ground when someone tried to push you out. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, not bad, just different. A faint trace of Greg's cologne mixed with whatever candle Sandra had burning. The furniture wasn't mine, but I recognized the old coffee table I'd built from pine boards, now shoved into a corner under a pile of magazines. I dropped my bag by the stairs and walked through each room slowly, taking mental notes. The framed photo of Mom that used to hang over the fireplace was gone. My old bookshelves in the den were replaced by some shiny glass unit. Even the curtains were different. It felt like walking into someone else's house, but the bones were still mine. The floorboards I'd sanded myself, the kitchen counters I'd cut and installed with my own hands. From the back porch, I could see the fence I'd built in one weekend before a snowstorm rolled in. Greg had complained it was too much work for just one person. I'd done it anyway, because Mom needed it. Standing there, I could almost hear the nail gun, smell the sawdust. This place had been shaped by every hour I'd put into it. That's what made hearing Sandra's voice on that call feel like a punch to the chest. I pulled the envelope from my backpack, the same one Mom had given me. Inside was the deed with my name printed in bold letters. No co-owners, no liens, just me. Sliding it back in, I felt the old discipline kick in. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. It was about protecting what was mine. I turned from the porch and headed back through the kitchen, my boots heavy on the tile. Somewhere in this house, my sister was making plans for me that didn't include me. And somewhere in me, a decision had already been made. The stairs gave that same familiar groan under my weight as I headed up to the second floor. I kept my pace slow, letting my eyes catch every detail that didn't belong. The guest room door was half open, and I could see a stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. The labels weren't in Sandra's handwriting, too neat, too deliberate. I nudged the top one open. Inside was a pile of manila folders, each with a bank logo on the front. The first statement I pulled had Greg's name, a balance circled in red, and the number was ugly past due on a credit card by nearly $12,000. I flipped to another. A personal loan for $48,000, interest compounding like wildfire. The last one in the stack wasn't even his. It was addressed to Sandra from a mortgage company in Boulder. Adjustable rate, missed payment notice. That explained the desperation in her voice during the call. She wasn't just planning ahead, she was scrambling to plug holes. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, then moved to their bedroom. A quick glance around told me they'd done a good job making it look ordinary. Bed made, closet shut, laundry hamper tucked away. But the desk in the corner had its lock broken off. Inside, an open laptop hummed quietly. I sat down, nudged the mouse, and the screen blinked awake. Sandra's email was still logged in. I scrolled through the inbox without touching the keyboard. The subject lines hit like a series of hammer blows. Property listing, 1425 West Elm. Follow-up, potential buyer interest. Closing dates, flexible sellers. The dates on these were from the past 2 weeks. She'd already been talking to agents. I clicked on one from a woman named Heather L., Realty One Group. The message was short. Once the property is vacant, we can move quickly. Buyer is ready for cash offer. I leaned back, letting that sink in. She was acting like she had the authority to sell a house she didn't own. Either she was counting on me being too sick to fight, or she thought she could get it done before I noticed. Footsteps creaked downstairs, probably Greg heading to the fridge. I closed the laptop, slid it back, and left everything as it was. Moving quiet came naturally. Years in uniform teach you how to vanish without leaving a trace. Back in the hall, I noticed a manila envelope wedged between a shelf and the wall. I pulled it free and slid out the contents. More real estate paperwork this time, preliminary agreements with Sandra's name signed in a wide, looping scrawl. It wasn't a formal contract, but it was enough to show intent. I slipped my phone from my pocket and took clear photos of every page. Flash off, sound off, document everything, touch nothing. That's the rule. Downstairs, the fridge door slammed shut, and I heard Greg mutter something about needing more beer. I stayed still until I heard the front door open and close. Then I headed for the kitchen. On the counter, next to a half-empty coffee mug, was a yellow legal pad. Across the top, in Sandra's handwriting, house sale, to-do list. Underneath were bullet points. Call Heather. Confirm buyer timeline. Draft power of attorney forms. Research rehab facilities near Denver. Get appraisal before she gets back. The last one made me pause. Before she gets back. She didn't even know I was already here. I snapped photos of the list, then stepped back, scanning the room for anything else. In the corner by the mail slot was a small stack of unopened envelopes. Most were junk mail, but one had the county assessor's seal. Property tax statement paid up, no liens. That would make the sale faster, which worked in my favor just as much as hers. I slid the envelope back into the pile and walked to the back door. Outside, the yard was clean, the garden beds neat. Too neat. Greg never had that kind of discipline. Either they'd hired someone to keep it tidy for showings, or Sandra had been treating it like a staged property already. Leaning against the door frame, I let the pieces line up in my head. Their debt wasn't small, their timeline was short, and their willingness to toss me into a rehab center without a second thought told me exactly how far they'd go. I didn't feel angry, not in the way most people think of it. It was more like that moment before a mission when the objective clicks into place. No wasted motion, no speeches, just a plan forming, sharp and clean. From here on out, everything I did would leave a trail they couldn't see until it was too late. I grabbed my truck keys from the counter and stepped out onto the porch, locking the door behind me. The wind cut across the street, sharp enough to make me pull my collar up. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pointed the truck toward downtown Colorado Springs. Colonel David Hensley was already at our usual spot, a hole-in-the-wall diner off Nevada Avenue that served the best black coffee in the state. He'd retired 5 years before I did my first overseas tour, but everyone in the Corps knew him. He'd taught half the younger officers how to plan under pressure and how not to panic when things went sideways. I dropped into the booth across from him. He gave me one look and said, "You've got the same face you had before we took that bridge in Mosul. Who's the target?" I told him everything. The overheard call, the rehab plan, the house sale emails, the paperwork I'd photographed. I didn't sugarcoat any of it. When I was done, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "So your sister and her husband are running an operation on you, and they think you'll just stand there and take it." "Pretty much," I said. He sipped his coffee like we were talking about the weather. "Then you run one back on them. 4 phases: recon, legal strike, asset extraction, psychological operation." I smiled. That's exactly what I was thinking. And we pulled out a stack of napkins and started sketching. Phase 1, document every move they'd already made, plus any new ones. Get audio, photos, paper trails. Phase 2, meet with a lawyer, verify ownership, set up a sale under my control. Phase 3. Move my property out, lock the place down, and handle the transaction before they knew what happened. Phase 4. Make sure when they found out, they understood exactly why they lost. I slid the first napkin toward him. They're leaving for a real estate conference in Vegas in 2 days. 8 days total. That's your window, he said, circling the number. You've got a hard deadline. Anything outside of that, they might see you moving. I nodded. I want it wrapped before they land back in Denver. He pointed at me with his pen. Then you treat this like a field op. You don't waste a minute. Every move you make, you think 2 ahead. They're family, but you can't let that get in the way. The more they think you're still on the defensive, the better. The waitress came by to refill our cups. She glanced at the napkins covered in arrows, boxes, and dates. You two plotting a bank heist or something? Just a home project, I said with a grin. As soon as she walked away, the colonel tapped the table. Your advantage is they underestimate you. Keep it that way. And remember, paperwork wins wars in civilian life. I folded the napkins and slid them into my jacket. Time to start recon. Walking back to my truck, the cold air felt sharper, more focused. Every step was measured, every thought already moving into the next phase. There wouldn't be any yelling matches or warning shots. If Sandra and Greg wanted to play it like a covert op, they'd get exactly that, only I'd be running it. By the time I hit the highway back toward Aurora, the plan was locked in my head like a mission brief. All I had to do now was execute. The front door closed behind me without a sound, the old latch catching just enough to keep it shut but not locked. I left my jacket on the hook and pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbing the voice recorder app before sliding it into the open space on the bookshelf camera side out. From that angle, it covered most of the living room and caught the bottom of the stairs where Sandra usually stood to yell for Greg. They didn't know I was back in town. That was my edge. The next 48 hours would be about letting them talk themselves into the noose. Late that afternoon, I parked my truck a block away and came back on foot. Through the open front window, I heard Greg's voice. If Heather can get the buyer to go higher, we could cover the Boulder mortgage and have enough for the kitchen remodel. Sandra's reply was sharper, almost annoyed. We just need it gone. Cash buyer means no inspection headaches. Once Morgan's in rehab, we can close in under 2 weeks. I didn't move. I let the recorder take it all in. That clip alone would be gold in front of any judge. Once the house went quiet, I slipped in through the back door and retrieved the phone. The audio was clear, every word crisp. I saved it to my encrypted drive and dropped the file into a folder labeled Phase 1. Next was paper. I headed upstairs to the desk I'd checked earlier. Sandra's laptop was gone, but a slim binder sat on top of the filing cabinet. Inside were printouts of emails with Heather, listing timelines, suggested list prices, and a draft flyer with exterior shots of the house. My house? I laid each page flat, took a photo, and slid it back exactly as I found it. No fingerprints, no moved staples. You learn in the field that even one small change can tip off your target. That evening, I made my way to the garage. The smell of motor oil and stale beer hung in the air. Greg's workbench was cluttered, but on the corner was a folded sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Call Rehab Center, quote, for 30 days, PTSD program. Below, it was a phone number and the name of a facility in Denver I'd never heard of. I didn't need to guess why they picked that angle. They'd seen me favor my right leg since the training accident, and Sandra knew enough about my deployments to spin a story about trauma. They'd turn my service into a weakness if it made them money. I took the note, photographed it, and put it back under the same half-empty beer bottle. The next morning, I positioned a small motion-activated recorder inside the hall closet. From there, it could pick up voices from the kitchen, living room, and front entry without being obvious. I tested it by pacing in front of the door and muttering. The playback was perfect. By noon, I had hours of their voices discussing potential buyers, debating whether to list furniture with the sale, and even arguing about who'd get my truck. Greg wanted to sell it for extra cash. Sandra said it would look bad to take too much at once. It wasn't just evidence, it was insight. I could see exactly how they thought, where their priorities were, and how they'd justify the whole thing to themselves. That night, I drove to a small cafe with reliable Wi-Fi and uploaded the recordings and photos to a secure cloud account only I could access. Then I made 2 encrypted copies on separate USB drives. One stayed in my truck's lockbox, The other I mailed to an old army buddy in Texas with no explanation, except, keep safe. Walking back to the truck, I could feel the plan tightening around them. Everything they said, everything they wrote, every step they took, I had it. And they didn't have a clue. The sky over downtown Aurora was that washed-out gray that made everything look colder than it was. I parked in front of a brick building with gold letters on the glass, Brooks and Waters, attorneys at law. Samuel Brooks had been my go-to for anything complicated since the Army screwed up my first VA claim. He was sharp, blunt, and allergic to small talk. Inside, he was behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, tapping a pen against a legal pad. Morgan, last time you came in, you were fighting the VA over a broken leg. What's the mission this time? I sat down and slid a manila envelope across to him. Inside were copies of the deed, the tax records, and the photos of Sandra's emails, to-do lists, and property flyers. My sister and her husband are trying to sell my house while I'm out of town. They're planning to get me into a rehab facility to make it easier. He opened the envelope, scanning the pages one by one. No raised eyebrows, no gasps, just the occasional nod. Deed is clean. Titles in your name only. No liens, no co-owners. Legally, they can't touch it without your consent. Could they forge something? Power of attorney? I asked. Sure, people try, but it wouldn't stand for 5 minutes in court if you're competent and can prove you never signed. And based on this, he tapped the rehab note photo, I'd say you've got more than enough evidence to prove intent to commit fraud. I leaned back in the chair. So my legal standing is solid. Rock solid. If you want, I can send them a cease and desist today, but if you're looking to move faster, we can play it quieter. You thinking about selling it yourself? Yes. Cash buyer, no contingencies. Close before they get back from a trip to Vegas in 8 days. He smiled for the first time. That's doable if you've got the right agent. And if you don't mind bypassing a full market listing, you'll avoid giving them any clue. I told him I already had an agent in mind. I just need you to make sure the paperwork is airtight and that my bank accounts are locked down. I don't want them sniffing around my finances once the sale goes through. Consider it done, he said, jotting notes. I'll set up a temporary account for the proceeds so the funds aren't sitting anywhere they might have access. Once the sale clears, you can move it wherever you want. He slid the folder back to me. You're in the clear, Morgan. The law's on your side. Now it's just about speed and precision. I stood up. Speed and precision are my specialties. As I stepped out of his office, the air felt different. Not warmer, but sharper. The kind of clarity you get after a briefing when you know exactly where you stand. No second guessing, no what-ifs. I stopped at a small bank branch on the way back. The manager, a woman in her 50s with the kind of no-nonsense tone I liked, walked me through setting up the new account Samuel had called ahead about. Wire transfers only. No debit card, no checks, she said, tapping the screen. Funds go in, stay locked until you move them. Perfect. Back at the house, I checked my recordings from the motion-activated mic. Sandra and Greg had been busy calls to Heather about pushing the price higher. Talk about getting Morgan's stuff boxed up before the month was over. I filed the audio, each clip labeled with date, time, and speaker. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up market data for the neighborhood. Samuel was right cash. Buyers were snapping up anything under $1 million if it was turnkey. My house, even with Greg's questionable taste in furniture, was more than ready. I drafted an email to Monica Carter, the agent I trusted, and attached a few exterior shots I'd taken that morning. The subject line was short, need cash offer, 8 days. By the time I hit send, my phone buzzed with a reply. Meet tomorrow morning. I'll bring a buyer list. I closed the laptop, stood, and looked around the kitchen. The walls were still the pale blue Mom had picked. The cabinets were the ones I'd installed myself. In a week, someone else would be standing here, but it wouldn't be Sandra or Greg. And when they came home to find the locks changed and the papers signed, they'd understand exactly what it meant to underestimate me. The morning air had that crisp bite that told you summer was officially gone. I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot a few minutes before 9, spotted Monica Carter's black SUV, and headed inside. She was already at a corner table, tablet open, coffee in hand. Monica stood when she saw me. Morgan Callahan, she said with a grin. Samuel called me last night. He says you're looking to move a property fast. No listing, no drama, cash only. That's my favorite kind of job. I slid into the chair across from her. 8 days from handshake to wire transfer. Can you do it? She tapped her screen. I've got 3 buyers in my back pocket who can close in under a week. One's a Denver-based investor who's been hunting for something in Aurora for months. The other 2 are out of state, no sentimental attachment, just numbers. I'll call all 3 today. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it between us. Recent photos, property tax record, title copy, you'll see it's clean. Monica flipped through the paperwork quickly, her eyebrows lifting at the condition of the kitchen and deck. This place is worth at least $900,000 in this market. If I push, I can get you an offer at $915,000. Cash, no inspection, closing in 8 days. You keep the furniture or sell it separately, it's up to you. I didn't even blink. Get me that number and you've got a deal. She smiled. I'll have a formal offer by tomorrow morning. We shook on it, and I left feeling like the first domino had just tipped. Back at the house, I started mapping out my move timeline. Every item I cared about needed to be out before closing. That meant a storage unit, packing supplies, and a few hours to sort through what was worth keeping. The rest could go. I called a storage facility on the edge of town, secure access, 24-hour surveillance, climate control. The manager confirmed they had a large unit available immediately. I reserved it under my name, prepaid for 6 months. Sandra's SUV was gone when I pulled back into the driveway. Inside, the kitchen was empty except for a dirty coffee cup in the sink. I took the opportunity to measure the rooms for the movers, snapping photos for my own reference. By mid-afternoon, Monica called. I've got your $915,000 cash offer from the Denver investor. He wants to sign tomorrow. No contingencies, no inspection, just a clean deal. Perfect, I said, let's lock it in. She emailed the preliminary agreement within the hour. I printed it, read every line, and called Samuel. He walked me through the clauses, confirmed there were no hidden hooks, and scheduled a notary for the signing. That evening, I went room to room, opening every closet, every drawer. Anything that mattered went into a pile on the dining table. Mom's photo albums, my service medals, a handful of tools from the garage I didn't trust anyone else to touch. By the time the sun went down, the pile was smaller than I expected. Most of what filled the house now wasn't mine. It was Sandra and Greg's, and that made it easy to leave behind. The deal was moving faster than they could imagine. They were still in Vegas, probably sipping watered-down cocktails and bragging about some phantom sale they thought they'd pull off when they got back. In less than a week, they'd learned the house they were counting on was long gone, and the only signature on the paperwork would be mine. The storage facility was tucked behind a chain-link fence off East Colfax, just far enough from the main road that you couldn't hear the traffic. A keypad at the gate beeped when I entered my code, and the heavy metal bars rolled aside. The place smelled faintly of cold cement, cardboard, and machine oil, a sterile quiet that made every sound echo. My unit was halfway down the 3rd row. I rolled up the metal door, the sound rattling through the corridor, and set the first box inside. It was a double-walled carton holding photo albums wrapped in plastic, stacked neatly to the left. The bronze star sat inside a black steel lockbox I pushed against the back wall. That box would stay locked even here, some things you don't leave to chance. The 2 movers I'd hired for the day, Rick and Joel, pulled up a minute later in a dented white box truck. Both looked like they'd done this work 1,000 times. Faded jeans, worn gloves, and the kind of silence that comes from knowing the job. They didn't ask questions, just followed my directions. Load only what I pointed at, label every box with my blue tape system, and stack them tight in the unit. I'd already walked through the house that morning with the tape roll, marking anything that belonged to me. Furniture that wasn't marked? Leave it. Decor? Leave it. Even the dishes, leave them. My sister could have every throw pillow in the place if it meant shaving time off my clock. By noon, we'd cleared my bedroom, the den, and half the garage. Every thump of a box hitting the dolly felt like peeling away a layer of the house from me. Joel hauled out the heavy black trunk from my closet, grunting as he shifted it onto the truck lift. I stayed close until it was strapped in tight inside, was a mix of service medals, personal documents, and a few things that would mean nothing to anyone else, but everything to me. We moved into the kitchen next. I paused for a second, hand on the cabinet door I'd hung myself. Mom had picked that pale blue color, insisting it made the room feel lighter. She'd been right. The paint still looked fresh after all these years, even after Sandra's habit of burning toast every other morning. I pulled open the drawer with my tools and pointed at the box beside it. That goes in the truck, back corner, top shelf. Rick nodded without looking up, already scribbling the label. Tools. Morgan. 1. The dining room table was next. I didn't want it, but I ran my fingers along the edge where Mom used to sit with her coffee and the Sunday paper. I left it where it was. Let Sandra have that ghost. By 3 o'clock, the storage unit was half full. On the right side, boxes stacked to shoulder-height books, winter gear, a few framed photographs wrapped in towels. The lockbox sat at the very back, behind a wall of heavier cartons. On the left, my camping gear and 2 plastic bins marked kitchen, keep. I kept the black trunk and a single duffel bag separate. Those would go with me directly when I moved. I closed the unit door and snapped the padlock shut, tugging it twice to make sure. The metal was cold under my glove. This was the kind of lock you had to cut with a grinder. On the drive back to the house, I stopped at a hardware store. I walked out with 2 high-security deadbolt sets, 4 spare keys, and a small box of tamper-proof screws. If the timing lined up, those locks would go in the same day the sale closed. Back at the house, the sun was low enough to throw long shadows through the living room. Without my belongings, the place felt stripped but not hollow. It was quieter, cleaner, like it was waiting for whatever came next. I carried the duffel to the upstairs hallway and unzipped it. Inside was a short list of essentials: change of clothes, a folder with my VA paperwork, my laptop, and a flash drive holding copies of every recording and photo I'd taken. That bag would not leave my sight until the deal was done. The movers wrapped up just before dark, carrying the last box of tools into the truck. Rick handed me the final invoice without a word. I signed it, shook his hand, and watched them drive away. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten breakfast as a kid, and pulled out the manila envelope with the deed. My name was printed in bold black letters, the ink slightly faded but still clear. I traced it with my thumb, then slid it back into the envelope. This was the last night the house would look anything like it had when I left for deployment. In a few days, it would belong to someone else entirely. Not Sandra, not Greg, not anyone who'd think they could decide for me. I stood, locked the front door, and tested the handle. Solid. Out in the driveway, the air had turned sharp and cold. My breath fogged in front of me as I crossed to the garage. Tomorrow, I'd meet Monica to sign the final papers. Tonight, the house was quiet, stripped of everything that mattered, and I was fine with that. It wasn't emptiness I felt. It was readiness. The morning started with frost on the windshield and the kind of still air that makes sound carry. I had the new deadbolts, the tamper-proof screws, and a cordless drill charged and ready. The hardware store smell of the packaging oil, metal, and faint glue followed me into the house. I began at the back door. The old lock slid out easily, screws spinning without resistance. I'd installed that one myself years ago, but it was a cheap set never designed to keep out someone determined. The new deadbolt was solid steel, beveled edges, a keyway so narrow you'd need a specialist to pick it. Once it clicked into place, I tested it 3 times. No sticking, no wiggle. Moving to the front door, I kept my eyes on the street. The neighborhood was quiet except for a dog barking somewhere down the block. I pulled the old strike plate and replaced it with the reinforced one, driving in screws long enough to bite into the wall stud. When I leaned my weight on the door, it didn't give an inch. Inside, I set up the camera gear. The first was a battery-powered unit, disguised as a smoke detector in the living room. Its field of view covered the couch, the front door, and the hallway to the kitchen. The second was a tiny pinhole lens in the bookshelf, aimed directly at the spot where Sandra usually dumped her purse. I connected both to an encrypted app on my phone, ran a test, and watched as my own image appeared on the screen in real time. In the kitchen, I mounted the last camera in the corner above the fridge. That one would catch the dining table and the back door, 2 places I expected them to linger when they came back. It wasn't about catching them doing something illegal anymore. I already had that. This was about control. They'd walk into what they thought was their space and find it altered in ways they couldn't reverse. Locks they didn't have keys for. Surveillance they couldn't see but would feel if I chose to tell them. I checked the motion detectors one by one, making sure the push notifications hit my phone instantly. No delays, no false triggers. With the physical work done, I turned to the smaller touches. The mail that had been piling up in the slot, gone redirected to a PO, box I'd opened under my name. Any deliveries scheduled for the house address were canceled or rerouted. Even the utility accounts were set to transfer out of my name on the closing date. By mid-afternoon, I walked the perimeter one last time. Every door and window was secure. The garage door opener remotes were reset, the old codes wiped from memory. The keypad outside now had a fresh 4-digit sequence no one but me knew. I stood in the driveway, looking at the house. From the outside, nothing had changed. Same paint, same shutters, same front porch light I'd replaced last winter. But inside, the balance had shifted. They might still think they were running their plan, but the house was mine in every way that mattered, right down to the locks and the air in the rooms. When I stepped back inside, the cameras pinged my phone again, showing my own boots crossing the floor. I set the drill on the counter, wiped my hands on a rag, and opened the encrypted app. 3 clear feeds stared back at me. If Sandra or Greg so much as breathed too loud in here, I'd know. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. The kitchen table still had faint scratches from years of coffee mugs and dropped keys, but tonight it was cleared except for a single stack of stationery and a fountain pen. I slid into the chair, uncapped the pen, and let the weight of it settle in my hand. The words came faster than I expected. Sandra, Greg. By the time you read this, the house at 1425 Hawthorne is no longer ours. It's mine, and I chose to sell it. The sale is complete. The proceeds are secure. You have no legal claim to any of it. I kept my handwriting even. No rushed scrawls, no angry slashes. I wanted them to read each line without any doubt about my state of mind. I know about the calls to Heather. I know about the preliminary agreements you signed without my knowledge. I have copies of your emails, your to-do lists, and your notes about placing me in a rehab center so you could make it easier. I paused, letting the pen hover above the paper. The next part had to be sharp enough to cut. I'm not in rehab. I'm not incapacitated. I'm not your problem. But you tried to make me your solution, and that ends now. The pen moved steadily, the sound of the nib against paper, a quiet, deliberate rhythm. Everything you left in this house that you want has been packed into a storage unit in your name. The address and access code are included below. You have 30 days to collect it before the unit is closed. After that, the contents are at the discretion of the storage company. I didn't need to list the items. They'd find out soon enough what I'd decided to keep. If you attempt to contest this sale or interfere with my affairs again, the evidence I've collected, recordings, photographs, and documents will be sent directly to my attorney, and if necessary, to law enforcement. This is not a threat, it's a guarantee. I signed my full name, capped the pen, and slid the letter into a plain envelope. Across the front, in block letters, I wrote, Sandra and Greg, read immediately. Beside it, I placed a second envelope with the storage unit information. Both went into the middle of the kitchen counter, where they couldn't miss them. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I checked my phone, 3 camera feeds, all clear. The letters sat under the soft glow of the overhead light, a fixed point in an otherwise empty room. It wasn't about getting the last word. It was about making sure there was no misunderstanding, no half-truths they could twist. Every sentence was final, backed by action that was already complete. I stepped back, looked at the counter one last time, and locked the front door behind me. The parking lot outside the title company was still wet from last night's rain, glistening under a thin layer of morning sun. I stepped out of my truck with the manila envelope under my arm, the one carrying my ID, the deed, and Samuel's revised contract. Monica was already at the glass doors, phone in hand, waving me over like we were about to board a flight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and copier toner. The receptionist buzzed us through to a small conference room. On the table sat a neat stack of documents, each with a yellow arrow sticker pointing where to sign. The buyer, a man named Daniel Hayes, was already there mid-40s, suit that fit too well to be off the rack, and the calm confidence of someone used to cutting big checks. He stood, shook my hand firmly, and said, Miss Callahan, I appreciate you making this happen on short notice. Mutual benefit, I said, taking a seat. Samuel joined us moments later, legal pad in hand. We're keeping this straightforward, he said, glancing at me before flipping to the first page. Cash offer. $915,000, no contingencies, closing today. Funds wired immediately upon recording. The first signature was easy. So was the second. By the fifth, I could feel the tension in my shoulders start to loosen. Monica slid each completed page to Samuel, who checked it, nodded, and set it in the done pile. Daniel signed just as quickly, barely glancing at the text. When the last page was done, Samuel handed it to the notary. She stamped it, slid it into a folder, and said, "That's it. The house is officially transferred." Daniel reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and passed it to Samuel. "Wire instructions." And Samuel opened his laptop, typed in the numbers, and double-checked every digit. "Funds will be in your temporary account within an hour. I'll call to confirm." We all stood. Daniel shook my hand again, said, "Enjoy your next chapter," and walked out. Monica lingered just long enough to say, "I'll handle the final keys and the paperwork delivery to the buyer's property manager. You don't have to step foot in that place again." That was exactly the plan. Outside, the air smelled cleaner. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and headed for the bank Samuel had arranged. By the time I walked through the doors, my phone buzzed Samuel's number. "It's in," he said simply. The bank manager met me at her office door with a printout. $915,000. The number sat there on the page, black ink against white, looking both unreal and completely certain. She slid a form toward me. "We can move the funds to a long-term account, or you can transfer them to multiple institutions. Whatever you want." "Split it," I said. "Half to my credit union, half to a high-security investment account. No online access for either. All transfers require in-person verification." She didn't blink, just started typing. Within minutes, the money was no longer in one place for anyone to target. When I walked back outside, the sun was higher, burning off the damp chill. I sat in the truck for a moment, the folder with the wire confirmation on the passenger seat. The house was no longer mine, but neither was it theirs, and the cash was untouchable. It was the kind of finality you could feel in your bones. The apartment complex in Colorado Springs was a clean row of brick buildings with wide sidewalks and fresh mulch around the flower beds. I parked in front of Building C, the morning light catching the mountains behind it, and felt the first hint of relief since I'd set this plan in motion. The leasing agent, a man in his 30s with a clipboard tucked under one arm, met me at the door. "Unit 2B's ready. Fresh paint, new locks, appliances, all checked." He handed me the keys and a welcome packet that went straight into my duffel. Inside, the air smelled faintly of new carpet. The living room had a wide window facing west, perfect for catching sunsets. I walked through each room slowly, not in the way you inspect a place you might rent, but the way you assess a position you plan to hold. The locks were solid, the sightlines clear, and the door to the small balcony gave me a view of the street below without being obvious to anyone looking up. 2 hours later, the moving truck from Aurora pulled in. Rick and Joel, the same guys from the storage run, started unloading boxes with the same quiet efficiency. My duffel and the locked trunk went in first, carried directly into the bedroom closet. Everything else, photo albums, tools, kitchen bins stacked neatly along one wall. I kept the furniture light. A couch, a small dining table, and the desk I'd built in my garage years ago. The rest could wait until I decided how long I'd stay here. When the last box was inside, I paid Rick in cash and watched the truck pull away. The quiet settled over the apartment instantly. I unpacked the essentials first. The Bronze Star went on a narrow shelf above the desk. Beside it, a framed photo of my unit in Afghanistan dust in the air, helmets tilted back, the kind of grins you only see when the worst is behind you. The kitchen came next. 2 mugs, a coffee maker, a skillet, and a handful of utensils. Enough to function, nothing to tie me down. By mid-afternoon, the sun was sharp through the window. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera feeds from Aurora. The kitchen counter was just as I'd left it, letters in place, light still on overhead. The empty living room sat in silence. I poured a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the ridgeline in the distance. The mountains were a reminder that there were places no one could touch if you were smart enough to claim them. Back inside, I placed the wire confirmation from the bank into the same lockbox as my service records. The click of the lock was soft but final. This wasn't just a new address. It was a forward operating base, and everything I needed was already inside. Steam curled from the mug in my hand as the feed from the kitchen camera flickered to life. The front door opened at 3:14 p.m., sunlight spilling across the hardwood, and Sandra stepped in first. Greg followed, sunglasses still on, a carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. They both froze when they saw the counter. The envelopes sat exactly where I'd left them. Greg closed the door behind him, tried the deadbolt out of habit, and frowned. Sandra picked up the larger envelope, tore it open, and started reading. Her lips moved, her expression shifting from confusion to a tight, hard glare. By the time she got to the part about the storage unit, her hand clenched the page so tight it wrinkled. Greg leaned over her shoulder. "What the hell is this?" She kept reading. When she hit my signature, she dropped the letter on the counter like it was burning her fingers. "She sold it," she said, voice flat. "No," Greg snapped, grabbing the paper. "She can't, it's in both our—" He stopped, scanning the deed reference in the letter, realizing it wasn't. "It's just her name. Always was." Sandra's eyes darted around the kitchen, as if the walls themselves might argue with me on her behalf. She had no right. "She had every right," Greg shot back, voice sharp. "What were you thinking? That she'd just sign it over?" Sandra stepped toward him. "You said we could make it work. You said. I said if she didn't know until it was done, maybe it'd go through. But you're the one who wanted to push her into a rehab facility. That's what blew it." The argument climbed fast. Sandra's voice got louder, Greg's sharper. My phone picked up every word. "You think she didn't know?" Greg barked. "She probably knew before we even left for Vegas." "Hat. She was supposed to be gone," Sandra shot back. "She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to—" She cut herself off, scanning the ceiling. Her eyes landed on the smoke detector camera. She stared at it just a little too long. Not enough to be certain she'd spotted it, but enough for me to know she sensed something. Greg slammed the envelope onto the counter and grabbed the smaller one. He ripped it open, reading the storage unit address and access code. "So what, we go get our stuff now?" Sandra's laugh was short, humorless. "Our stuff? She probably kept anything worth more than $100. This'll be junk." Greg dropped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "We're screwed. The money's gone. The house is gone. You think she's going to cut us in? After this?" Sandra didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the counter like the letter might change if she glared at it long enough. I watched her take out her phone, scroll, and stop, probably checking bank accounts. Her shoulders tensed when whatever she saw confirmed the truth. There was nothing new, no sudden deposit, no windfall waiting. Greg shoved the letter back into the envelope, muttering under his breath. Sandra grabbed it out of his hand and crumpled it. In the living room, Greg sank deeper into the couch. "You want to know what she just did? She just burned the only bridge we had left." Sandra's reply was quieter, but the mic caught it. "Number?" She reminded us she was never on our bridge in the first place. They didn't touch the cameras. They didn't try the locks. They just sat there in silence for a long stretch, the sound of the fridge, the only thing moving the air. It wasn't rage I saw on Sandra's face by the end. It was something sharper recognition. She'd underestimated me. The last frame from the camera feed showed Sandra sitting at the kitchen table, her face blank, Greg leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I let the app run for another minute before I closed it, and set the phone on the counter beside my coffee. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the wall clock. Outside the window, the mountains were glowing under the late afternoon sun, edges sharp against the sky. I opened the small balcony door and stepped out, letting the cool air hit my face. From here, the view stretched all the way to the ridgeline. Somewhere beyond that was the city I'd just left behind, and the house that was no longer mine. I didn't feel the pull to go back. I didn't even feel the need to drive past it one last time. Inside, I opened the lockbox and took out the bronze star. The ribbon was still crisp, the metal catching the light. I set it on the desk beside my laptop, then poured a small glass of bourbon. The first sip was warm, steadying. I leaned back in the chair, watching the light shift across the room. The weight in my shoulders that had been there for months, maybe years, was gone. I thought of Mom's voice, the one thing I could still hear clear as day. "Don't let anyone take what's yours." She hadn't meant just houses or money. She'd meant peace, self, respect. The ground you stand on, whether it's dirt, concrete, or just the space you've claimed for yourself. The phone buzzed once a security alert from the Aurora cameras. I didn't need to check it. Whatever was happening there now was no longer my concern. I swiped the alert away, closed the app entirely, and deleted it from the home screen. In the kitchen, I rinsed the glass, set it in the rack, and turned off the light. The apartment already felt like mine in a way the house hadn't for years. I sat back down at the desk, looked at the metal one more time, and smiled. The mission was done, not just completed, accomplished. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying anyone else's mess on my back. Out the window, the sun dropped behind the mountains, leaving the sky a deep, clean blue. I didn't need anything more than that. Some battles are fought on foreign soil, with rifles and sandstorms. Others happen quietly, in kitchens and living rooms, against people who share your blood. Both require strategy. Both demand you know exactly what you're willing to lose and what you'll fight for until the end. I didn't win by force. I won by refusing to play their game. And when you walk away with your ground intact, that's victory enough.